Where the hell are the Jeffrey Epstein files? Where the hell are the JFK files? We still don't know. We still don't know what's going on here. We want answers. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna leads a House Oversight Task Force on declassification of federal secrets. She has to run to a hearing right after our interview here. So I want to get some answers from the Congresswoman who joins us now. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. And we're very happy to be pushing bottom up, really all the way up to the Attorney General's office to push for the release of all of these documents.
Well, I think bottom up is a great way to put it because you had to go on X/Twitter over the past few weeks to demand answers from the Attorney General's office, new Attorney General Pam Bondi. Like I said, I've considered Pam a friend over the years for a long time. However, we are demanding answers on these Epstein files, and we're not getting them. So are you confident we are going to get answers from the Attorney General on this question?
Well, look, everything that she is saying that we will. However, I can tell you from our task force perspective is we are still waiting on our official briefing from the Department of Justice. And to my understanding, just looking at the timeline here, we formed up the task force. We sent letters right away. A lot of those letters, and granted, I know there's a lot going on, but these are some very important topics to the American people. And really, you look at the whole issue of what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. This guy was a prolific, pedophile and very rich, had a lot of wealthy, powerful friends. And yet there's not really been one person charged aside from his, female counterpart. And so if we really want a free and fair society, that means that justice has to be served regardless of how rich or powerful you are. And so I think that when we formed the task force, knowing that these were some of the biggest requests, and really, I would argue, something that was mandated on behalf of the American people when they voted for Donald Trump, really, that was why we called this into question. And so, look, she's saying she's going to release the documents. I'm really hoping that she releases the documents. It has become apparent and evident that there have been different people in various agencies, whether it's the FBI or the CIA, that have been obstructionists. However, that's not an excuse for not communicating what's actually happening to the American people. And so that's exactly what we're pushing for on that specific topic.
Julian Assange said the reason the FBI wouldn't let the Epstein client list come out in court is because if they did, and I'm quoting him now, their blackmail would no longer be useful and the CIA would lose control over all the powerful people they spent decades setting up. Do you think I've talked to FBI whistleblowers who've said, I don't want to see the documents. I want to see indictments. And this idea that they're paper documents in some sort of file folder is just bogus. Like, they're being held in New York. No, they're on the Sentinel computers, which the FBI has access to. They're digital records. Why do we have to go to New York to get a box of paper documents? I think that those
are all valid questions. We want to also see indictments. And frankly, I think that the DOJ needs to be as aggressive as possible. I actually spoke to a whistleblower that was on the Benny Johnson's show. I think it's now been about a week and a half ago or about a week ago, and said that as soon as President Trump got elected and they knew that there was an incoming new DOJ and FBI, that there were rogue actors at the FBI and this is the one, I guess, hint that I got as to who the individual was, because he didn't want to exactly give me the name, but he said it was the former deputy director of the FBI that was destroying some of this evidence, some of these documents. And to my understanding, they were digital, they weren't actual paper copies. And so I'm hoping that these agencies are doing their jobs, but you do bring up valid questions in that no one wants to just see an investigation, right? Like, our whole objective is to push for transparency and push for the release of these documents because, frankly, not just Congress, but the American people deserve to know. But also, too, it's just how could you actively, restore faith in government when you're, hiding this information from the American people? And so that's exactly why President Trump demanded transparency and why we're pushing for it.
And big questions too. We've spoken with investigative journalists on this question. Jeffrey Epstein's ties to Robert Maxwell, who, he met with the Israeli prime minister over 30 times, Ehud Barak. So a lot of Americans, on our show, we have tens of thousands of people, and I see the comments daily. They're saying, well, we will never get answers because of our foreign government relationship with Israel. We will never see those connections to Mossad, even though we have investigative journalists, the Times of Israel, even reporting on these connections. Like, how willing do you think Congress is to actually get their hands dirty with this?
Well, I don't think it's Congress. I think it's the DOJ, right? Because the DOJ holds the declassification ability for these documents. But look, I think that all of those questions will continue to go unanswered unless we see the information and the evidence, which is why we're pushing for it. The whole goal and objective of this is you can't just hide the information, because when you hide the information, it looks more suspect, and then it gives validation to various theories. And so why would they not want to be transparent about it? But what that also brings me to kind of the information that we've been seeing in regards to the declassification efforts for JFK, MLK, and RFK. So actually tomorrow I have a meeting with the entire task force, which we are very happy that Tulsi Gabbard is leading point on President Trump's executive order. And I want to remind people that the executive order declass specifically only pertains to JFK, RFK, and MLK. I also want to give updates that I've been dealing with the National Archives. And actually, under President Biden, there was also a declassification, but the American people never saw those documents because the National Archives sat on them. And so the National Archives has stood up a website where they are going to be housing everything JFK. That landing page is actually already up and active. And I actually just got off the phone yesterday with the National Archives saying that they did obtain, they scanned, and those declassified documents under Biden will be up shortly on the website. But, again, same questions about JFK. What really happened on that day? I would argue that it's one of the biggest unsolved cold case files in American history. And based on new developments in technology, we know for a fact that the single bullet theory that the Warren Commission pushed was actually not accurate. That it was very likely, in my opinion, that there was more than one shooter, and that multiple doctors that were actually at the initial facility that President Kennedy was brought to reported that there was an entry wound, obviously not in just the front of his head, but in his neck. And then at the autopsy reports in Maryland, you saw that there was an entry wound also at the back. And so I've actually been told by a civilian declassification board that Congress can go to when they're trying to push for declassifications of certain documents that I need to request, and I have begun the process of requesting information from the CIA Inspector General on whistleblowers that had reported that the CIA never handed over evidence to Congress during these initial commissions and appointments to investigate, because there was information that allegedly implicated not just the CIA, but also communists dealing with the CIA and potentially the mob.
The mob. And of course, there are lots of questions. Again, I come back to Israel's connections to all of this. JFK pushing the Israel lobby to register as a foreign agent, and then shortly thereafter, he's dead. Lots of questions about this. The CIA's connections, the Secret Service's connections in all of this. Lyndon Johnson's connections, who I think is one of the greatest traitors in American history. And how high will this go to the president, the former vice president of the United States, all the way up to the presidency? Do you think, I think Americans are so sick and tired of being teased. I know you've talked about this before. It's like the American people are sick of it. We get these little drips and drabs. We just want to see all of it. We want, Mike Pompeo trying to stonewall the release of this, protecting the CIA.
We're sick and tired of it. Yeah, so Mike Pompeo did stonewall. And going back to even just questions you asked earlier, we can't know the answers of truly what happened unless we have all the information that can provide the full picture. And that's why we are pushing for this information to be declassified. I actually feel very confident in regards to JFK, MLK, and RFK that they will be really, granted, I haven't even seen the documents, but I do feel confident based on our conversations with the White House, based on my conversations with Tulsi Gabbard, that information is going to be released. But, going through this whole declassification push right now, what I'm also finding and how the bureaucracy really needs to be cleaned up, and this is kind of where Congress can come in, is it was brought to my attention by the National Archives that even though a president might order a declassification, then after that order comes through on executive order, it has has to go back to the original agency that actually initially had that document or recording or whatever it might have been. And then it's up to review of the director of that agency to declassify the document. Then it goes back to the archives. So all of that in itself is a complete mess, and that needs to be cleaned up. If someone orders it to be declassified, declassify it, put it up online, call it a day. It doesn't need to go through all this bureaucratic nonsense. Then I'm also finding that at the archives, they actually had archivists that were preventing, and as you saw with Biden's release of some of this JFK stuff, they were sitting on the documents and never uploaded them for the American people to see. Why would they do that? So there's a lot happening. I do believe that there's kind of a shock within the system, and the system, I mean government right now, these different agencies that have more like-minded people that believe in transparency and that the American people deserve to know answers. And then you have the holdovers. And then I would argue that you have also people that are probably not wanting to release information for more nefarious reasons. And so I know a lot of people, the leftist media try to say, oh, Luna's a conspiracy theorist. She's over here, trying to push all these crazy conspiracies. I'm not pushing any crazy conspiracies. I'm pushing for the release of this information to let the American people decide what they're going to do.
Well, we need more brave people like you. And by the way, the CIA created the term conspiracy theorist to cover up to cover up people who were questioning the JFK assassination. So I love that the left uses CIA talking points to try to discredit people.
Well, and there's also but I want to point out there that there's Democrats that have the same views and perspectives that I do. And so what they're really doing is they're trying, and it's crazy to me, right? Like JFK, Democrat, RFK, Democrat. Why would they at all try to discredit the release of this information? And then even just myself, I've come up with, working with Johnson and Comer to try to push for this declassification. Mind you, you can see now why you would need a task force to try to push and put, bottom up pressure on some of these agencies if we don't see that they're doing right by the American people to release this information. And literally, I was actually looking online and it was like bot accounts were actually attacking me, trying to discredit us, putting out wrong information. Obviously, we don't hold declass. Everyone knows that now. But the point is you could see that there was an orchestrated attempt as soon as I was announced as the head of this task force. And it's not just me. There's other really conservative members on this panel and also Democrats that want transparency. But, you'll see all of that kind of play out in politics and in the press. And I was interesting when I first got to Washington, there was an outlet that was attacking me. It was the Washington Post. And then obviously Politico. And one of my colleagues who's no longer in office now, but he told me, he goes, oh, well, you know that those outlets are just a mouthpiece for the intelligence agencies. And I did not know that at that time. Now I know. We all know.
Well, yeah, we've had FBI and former CIA members tell me directly that if they want to leak a story to the media, they put it in the mouthpiece, Washington Post or New York Times. They just are extensions of the intelligence community. So you can't trust anything.
It's gotten really dirty, just to kind of put it in perspective, kind of just the stuff that we've kind of seen after this happens. But like you see, the bot accounts, the hits. I've had my personal cell phone number is now being constantly spammed, which is like, I don't know how, obviously, I think it's probably foreign government, but where they're spamming us, sending us phishing information. I had, when I first got elected, because of how I view things, my perspective, I had my DD-214, which is my military service record, and my EPRs was leaked to the New York Times. I know this because journalists at the New York Times contacted my former acting supervisor, and they would have never been able to find that unless they were actually looking into my personal files, which are not something that you can FOIA. So yeah, it's a pretty dirty game up here, but I am big in that there's other people like me in Washington that have this perspective. With this new incoming administration, it is going to be one of the few times in history that we are ever going to be able to get this transparency. And so we're not going to stop demanding answers, even if that means putting pressure on our own guys to do the right thing. To be clear, I'm not a bully, but the mandate is clear, and the mandate is people want transparency, and so we're going to continue to fight for it.
I've spoken to families, victims of 9/11, and individuals who, well, obviously the 9/11 Commission was a total whitewash and a scam. We all know that, I think. So
I have some information for you on that. Yeah.
Please. And this is a big question. We have victims of the families of 9/11 who want answers on the buildings coming down, demolitions. I have reporters who were there on the ground from Fox News at the time who were watching and listening to the firefighters saying explosions are going off, Building 7 coming down with no, I mean, all of these things. Americans are sick and tired of this cover up. What do you know about 9/11 that you can share?
Well, what I can tell you is we're requesting all information pertaining to 9/11. Again, I haven't seen information or documents, but this is, again, going down the how do you actually get transparency if you want to answer these questions and actually have discussions on what took place. You need to have the full perspective and story. I was actually contacted by a group of families, and not just myself, but the oversight task force. So we actually have investigative attorneys working with us on all this. So it's not just a bunch of members, moseying around trying to kick over rocks. We actually have a legitimate task force here. We were contacted by a group of families and their attorneys that had actually stated that leading up into 9/11, that the FBI grossly mishandled evidence. I would argue after you probably hear this, you'll probably come up with your own theories on what they did with this. But for example, they had documentation and footage of people or of an individual casing the Capitol, and they never did anything about it. Let me tell you something. When you have an individual that is flagged and you have footage of them casing a Capitol and you don't investigate, what does that tell you about the agency? We had information brought forward to us from these families, and they had actually obtained this information from UK intelligence, of which they had said that UK intelligence passed this to the FBI. And it was of individuals that were, I guess, aiding some of these pilots leading up into 9/11. They never did any follow-up into who these organizations and individuals were working with. They literally dropped the ball, and in my opinion, so grossly mishandled, it seems as if it was intentional. So these need to be discussed. How do you avoid this from happening in the future? How do you rein in a agency or an intelligence outfit that seems like it's operating outside the purview of the federal government? Is you have to push for this transparency. So please understand and believe that we are also frustrated, which is why we're asking these questions. To be clear, these questions wouldn't even be a topic of discussion if the task force had not brought it to the forefront of the discussion. And so as we continue to push for this, as we continue to demand transparency, we are going to be keeping everyone up to date every step of the way, but we are going to also be releasing this information directly to you as soon as we get it. So there's not going to be any gatekeeping. We're not looking over this information in a skiff somewhere. As soon as it's declassified, it's going right to us and right to you guys. And also too, I'm getting the, I got to go to my hearing. So
you got to go.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have you back. We've got a lot more questions. I want to talk UFOs. I have a lot of other questions, but more on the 9/11 files I'd love to talk with you about as well. Congresswoman Luna, thank you so much for joining us here. Thanks for your bravery on these issues, and keep us in the loop.
Thank you very much.